All right, everyone. Welcome back to the AutoCAD show. I am your host, the Grand Poobah Craig, master of all things AutoCAD. And what we're going to be doing now, hopefully everyone in class has caught up with their floor plans, their ceiling plans, their one section, and to repeat, I did two because I'm weird. You only need one, and their interior elevations. Those elevations need to be your bathroom and the kitchen, and you need to show all usable cabinets in your kitchen. For example, you need to show this area here, looking at that cabinet, and looking at this cabinet. You don't need to show this area looking at this wall. Why? Because all that's blank. And the side elevation that I'm showing of these cabinets of the section that's going all the way through here will suffice for the purposes of this class. So, one of the big things what we're working on today is I'm going to show you some of the basics of notation. How to note up your drawings, how to properly dimension them is going to be a biggie. And this is another one of those things that's a lot like doing your elevations. I can show you some basic theory. You're going to have to take that theory and apply it to your design. So I'm going to start by making my current layer, my dimension layer, G-ANO-DIMS. And yes, I'm going to click on model. I'll do my work in here. So we're going to be looking at our dimensions. Now I'm not going to use this dimension command. I'm going to use this one because there's a couple of different things that I need to show you here. The first of which is a linear dimension. I'm just hovering over here. A linear dimension is either going to be horizontal or vertical. There's another option. We can use an aligned dimension, which is going to be any dimension on an angle. There are a few of us who are going to use an angular dimension. I happen to need one because I have a wall that's drawn at an angle. Typically, we don't dimension the length of an arc. It's not something that I've done very often at all. Obviously, we know dimension radius or dimension in diameter. We don't use ordinate dimensions, and I doubt any of us are going to use a jogged dimension. The other big thing that we need to worry about is going to be the dimensioning the thicknesses of the walls. We need to show, especially, dimensioning the thickness of the wall is also very, very critical, especially for those of us, like myself, who made a distinction between their plumbing walls and their non-plumbing walls. Okay, so you know what? There's a little more. Sorry about that. It's the downside about doing this. Sometimes my Facebook friends make an unannounced arrival. I don't want to see the ceiling and I don't want to see the furniture when I'm doing the dimensioning. So I'm going to go back to the paper space, but I'm going to double click inside my viewport so that I'm actually working in model space. I'm just doing it through the viewport window. Now, one of the things that we do have additional grid lines in here. Now, the purposes of dimensioning this is we need to tie this information back to existing information. We need to know how far from this wall the contractor is going to put that wall, and then that wall, and then that wall. So I hope that makes sense. So we're going to tie, we need to tie this information back to an existing reference point. And the dimension command works fairly straightforwardly. It's 3 mouse clicks, and you'll be able to see it all play out. So I'm going to start by clicking on my linear, or up here it says linear, that starts my linear dimension. And my first point is going to be this endpoint here. My second endpoint is going to be right here. And that starts my dimension. And you can see as I move my mouse, that's going to dictate where I put my dimension line or my dimension string. Now, in the vast majority of cases, we always want the dimensions to be outside of the actual plan. So I'm going to pull this away just a hair. You know, a little room in here to in case there's any additional information that needs to be there. We don't want dimension strings to run right through the middle of the room if we can help it. The reason is that there are going to be other pieces of text and notation that will live inside the plan, Uh, so we put dimensions on the outside for readability. I'm going to click linear again, and I need to dimension the thickness of my wall. And I can actually use my snaps to make sure that my dimension strings line up. So we're just going to work my way across. And again, I can push return and start that command all over again, just like any other command. Okay, that got off. This is where having the object tracking can be a little bit of a problem sometimes. Okay, I'm going to dimension here. The reason is underneath this piece of cabinetry, underneath this bar top, is actually some wall. And you can see it says 6 inches. I need to fix that. So I'm going to use my stretch command. I want to stretch right through here. I'm just going to pull that back an inch. And you'll notice that my dimension automatically updated. This is one of the nice things about how dimensions work, or can work in AutoCAD. You can create dimension strings that are all completely broken, and you have to manually edit text. Most people don't do that anymore. Now, one of the things that we could do is I could do a dimension, or I could place a dimension. Let's not say do a dimension. Be a little more proper with our grammar. I could place another dimension there. Or I can place one long dimension across the entirety of the unit here. And you know what? I actually put that in the wrong spot. These dimensions, when we originally drew our floor plan out, remember we had dimensions that were running to the center lines, or the grid lines. So let's put that dimension on the grid lines. Let's put another string of dimensions here. Showing the existing grid lines, and let's put them vertically as well, right there. Now, the nice thing about doing dimensions through your paperspace viewport is you see how close the end of this line is to the edge of my viewport. If I would have done that here in model space, I don't know where the edge of the viewport actually is. So I could end up placing a dimension and putting it out here thinking, oh yeah, that looks fine. And then going to my paperspace and I can't even see it. So that's one of the reasons I like doing my notations through viewport. That's just me. Okay, we have this information now. What am I missing? Oh yes, I'm missing my wall thicknesses. So let's add my wall thicknesses. Here's where you see how the linear dimension can be both horizontal or vertical. It all depends on the orientation of your clicks, in which order you place them, and which direction they're all facing. Now, one of the things that we can do, you can't change it after the fact, but you can place it and then move it where you want it. You can do that. Where am I going to put him? Right. Yeah, we'll put him right there. Now, this text is in the wrong place right now. And the direction that the leader kicks off, it's a little strange, and the rules aren't always consistent. But you notice that these dimensions have grips, so I can click anywhere on these grips and I can move this thing around. I can even click on the defining end and I can move these around. I can redefine what I'm dimensioning after I've placed the dimension. And if I click here on the text, I can move that text out to there. And then, because I know my wall is 8 inches thick, I just used the mirror command to establish that. So I can use my mirror command one more time. to establish that that's 4 inches. Oops, you know what I forgot? I forgot the end here. There we go. Okay, let's get the 4 inches across my horizontal walls. There we go. And I'll do what I did last time. I will move that and then mirror it. Grab that, grab both of those dimensions, and mirror. Okay. So I've got my existing conditions have been dimensioned, and the only reason I'm dimensioning my existing conditions is just so that we know what the existing stuff is, and basically it looks a little better than to have some things that are unknown. So we want everything tied down. And here's where I'm instantly going to break one of my first rules. Well, I'm not exactly break it, but I'm going to stretch it a little bit. I told you that we don't normally want dimensions running right through the middle of a plan. Well, I don't want to take the dimensions for these rooms and pull them all the way out to the edge of the drawing. So I will have these. I'll have these rooms going right through here. Place another dimension. I'm going to zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. And to show the thickness of the wall, there we go. Now I'm going to skip over the hallway in the middle for now, because there's two different rules of thought here. One is, because I know this 18'6" dimension is existing, and I know I've got a 4-inch dimension and a 4-inch dimension, that between these 3 dimensions for the existing conditions, I no longer need this hallway to be dimensioned, because the math will just work itself out. Just like when I was creating this bathroom, I offset the wall 9 feet, and then I offset this bottom one 3 feet. In construction, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to start with one wall, and they'd offset it 3 feet, and they'd basically draw a line in chalk right there. And then they would do the same thing for this side. Alternately, we can go ahead and put a dimension going all the way across. It really doesn't hurt anything. And now I want to run a set of dimension strings along this bottom edge to locate these walls. I'm about to show you another couple of options here. As it happens, I know for a fact that this wall and this wall align. I know it because that's how I drew it. So I could actually delete those dimensions. I said, well, how am I going to know where those things are? Well, in the handout, not in the handout, in class material, I sent out a new batch blocks. It's called tags, and right now there's this one called align. So I'm going to place this tag in here, and this is a shorthand that a lot of contractors use. And it's, as you can tell, it's an annotative block. It's or a dynamic block. It's stretchable and it's movable. And we can just modify him and line him up like that. That tells the contractor that these walls are meant to align. So the dimensions leading up to the placement of this wall will tell the contractor this. But you know what I did that's wrong? That align the text is reading from the left-hand side of the page. That's not right. So I'm going to click on my dynamic block, and you'll notice I've got that little arrow, that little blue arrow. If I click on that arrow, then the direction of my arrows on the block change. I can then right-click on the grip, come down to rotate. There's my base point. Rotate it 180 degrees. Now the text is reading from the right-hand corner of the page, which is exactly what I wanted it to do. And another thing that I can do is I can actually delete if I wanted to. Oh, come on. I can delete this dimension. And the reason I can delete this dimension is the same reason that I can delete this one. The reason is we have existing information here, and existing information here, and here. If something weird happens out in the field and we give them a dimension here, where let's say they goof on the size of this room, or maybe when they actually built the building that we're retrofitting with these hotel rooms, they didn't do 44'3", they just did 44 feet. Well, that's obviously going to throw this dimension off, and that would be a prompting for a revision to the documents from the contractor. So by leaving these dimensions out, if these overall conditions are wrong, or if something happens while they're building it and they kind of creep things around a little bit and don't put things in the exact right spot, we don't have an exact perfect dimension that's going to lock them into something that will accidentally give them a conflict. But I wanted to point out that what I have shown here is almost all the information they would need to locate all these walls. One of the things that we don't have yet is we don't have this angled wall located yet, and I definitely need to put that in. So I'm going to create a linear dimension from there to there. I need to point this out. I've seen a few people do this on accident. You see how this endpoint coincides with the endpoint for the wall. This is really important because what we do not ever want to do is something like this. You see how this dimension overlaps these other two? We do not ever, ever, ever want to do that because it's just bad math, and it's a bad condition all the way around, and it will lead to problems. I don't mind if these two lines overlap. We do not want this line to completely, to have other dimensions completely inside of it. That's just a problem. Okay. All right, a few more linear dimensions. Now I'm pulling this up a little extra high because I actually want these dimensions. I want them to align, just for nice aesthetic purposes. Now, because we have this dimension is 12 feet, I do not need to show the dimension for that opening, but I still need to show the angle for that opening. And technically, I should probably show the thickness of that. So this is where an angled dimension can come in, or the tricky part about an angled dimension, and I'll show you this, not an angled, a line, but I'll show you the angled one now because that's what I was just talking about. That tells me what angle that is at. But an aligned dimension always wants to be parallel to the points that you select, not necessarily the line. Those are very odd dimensions. You would never ever dimension an opening this way. You just wouldn't. And that's basically because I didn't design the opening to work that way. And you'll notice if I modify these, that the angle that these two grips create is what defines the angle for this line here. I don't like having those. I generally don't like using these. What I will use, so I'll use a regular dimension. And I'll pop it here. This is where readability can get a little weird. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And you'll notice that it doesn't really appear like this dimension is reading properly. Because remember I said a few minutes ago that dimensions and text wants to read from either the bottom of the page or from the right-hand side of the page, and it looks like this dimension is actually readable from the left-hand side. Well, technically, because of how it's rotated, it's also readable from the bottom, so that qualifies. This is just one of those weird occurrences where this is the right way for the dimension to read. Now, the only part that we're missing is I need to know what the distance is between here and here. So I'm going to move this over here. Make a copy of him. There we go. And then line them up. So there we go. That's the one missing piece that I needed. Thickness of that wall and the 5-foot dimension right there. Now with the 5-foot dimension right here, again, they can use the math and they can add all these dimensions up and they can figure out, oh yeah, well it's 5 feet clear here. Now this is all the dimensions that we need to place on our floor plan. So in the next video, I'm going to show you dimensions on the ceiling plan. Double click outside. I'm going to save this. I'm going to show you one other thing real quick before I get to that. You will see tag drawing title. So like, well, before I drag and drop that in, this goes on G-Ano title, T-I-T-L. This is for your drawing titles. Now we can drag and drop. Now there's some special characteristics of this guy. The first of which is all this text in here is editable. So this is drawing number 1 because, well, this is the first drawing on this sheet. The drawing scale is actually, it's 1/4 of an inch. So 1 inch is 4 feet. A 1/2 inch would be 2 feet. And 2 inches is going to be 8 feet. And the drawing title here, floor plan. And this is also a dynamic block. Not that it really matters. You can stretch that, make it long, make it short. If you have 3/8 inch scale or, ooh, oh boy, that's a nice thing to have fixed. It's a good thing everything's at the even graphic scale. I made a modification of this from our standards, and that's obviously something that I need to correct. We won't worry about it for now, but I wanted to have that there. I just wanted to have that there. Okay, save it. And now, let's look at sheet 1.